President-elect Donald Trump's top policy points that broke through to voters was the economy. Trump has promised more tariffs and less taxes, just like the one that he's threatening to put on Canada.
Exactly. Now his economic team is starting to come together, taking shape. Our Alex Burstein joins us now in studio. Alex, who's going to be working with the president-elect when he comes into office on that all-important issue of the economy?
Yeah, a pair of billionaires are Trump's new picks to lead the Commerce and Treasury departments. Howard Lutnick has been tapped as Commerce Secretary, while Scott Bessent is his pick to lead the Treasury. Lutnick's current job is CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, a financial services company. His recent big moves, though, have been through controversial special purpose acquisition companies, or SPACs, which have benefited billionaires like Lutnick's, but tend to hurt ordinary investors. Now Lutnick will also be in part in charge with the Trump's tariffs, which the president-elect has made a huge part of his campaign. This week, Trump said he'd consider 100% tariffs on BRICS nations if they abandon the U.S. dollar. Lutnick's kind of been on both sides when it comes to tariffs. Here's what he had to say 2 months ago about them on CNBC.
I think we should put tariffs on stuff we make and not put tariffs on stuff we don't make. It's pretty simple. And of course, it's a bargaining chip. We can't sell a Ford or GM in Europe. You go to Europe, you can't sell a Ford or GM. Why? There's 100% tariffs.
And then there's Scott Bessent, who could make history as just the second openly gay cabinet member in U.S. history. The former hedge fund manager in the past supported Democrats and was a high-up Democratic fundraiser, but now his policy points align very heavily with Trump. He's very pro-deregulation and deficit reduction, but is in favor of those Trump tax cuts. On tariff, Bessent said that they can be used as a sanctioning tool mainly on China. 2 weeks ago on CNBC, Bessent outlined how both tax cuts and sanctions can help the nation without causing inflation.
You can't have it both ways. You can't say a tax cut's inflationary and a tariff is also inflationary, right? I don't think they're necessarily inflationary. What we're seeing, I think, today in the bond market is, I don't think the bond market is worried about Trump 2.0 inflation.
We want to welcome Ben Bascuk to the desk to discuss this. Alex, also welcome to the desk. Ben, what do you want to start with?
Yeah, so talking about Bessent, I think something we got to focus on is his plan here. He calls it, I guess, his 3-3-3 plan, which is to make the deficit, which is excess government spending, 3% of the total gross domestic product, grow the GDP annually by 3%, and produce 3 million more barrels of oil per day. Now, the interesting thing about this plan, it's solid on paper. It's getting received well by a lot of Americans. But he's going to have to juggle with deregulation, additional energy production. We know Lee Zeldin and Doug Berger are going to be huge players when it comes to that. And he's going to have to juggle Trump's tariffs. That's a huge thing. I know I talk about tariffs a lot, but we're doing it again. Trump's tariffs, we know tariffs cause inflation. That's going to make it a lot more difficult to grow the GDP, which is going to work against this 3-3-3 plan. So if Trump's tariffs are there, he's juggling that. He's going to have a lot of people in his ear. He's regulating a full agency, and that he's going to have to report back to Donald Trump. So is he going to be able to push this plan through with those tariffs in sight, working against that and raising inflation? We'll have to see.
Well, Ben, I have to eat crow a little bit because we had a discussion about the Treasury Secretary pick when we were co-anchoring market shares, another great show here at Citrus TV. I was pretty convinced it was going to be Howie Lutnick, who we're going to talk about in a minute. He actually got the Commerce Secretary role. Bessent ended up at Treasury. So really interesting to see that pick. That was kind of the expected choice for Treasury Secretary. A more unexpected choice was Trump's pick for Labor Secretary. Who did he go with, and why is she becoming a little bit of a controversial figure with some on the right?
Yeah, so he went with Lori Chavez-Deremer. She's a Republican, a representative from Oregon. And I think to understand this pick, we got to go back a couple months. Take a look at a clip here in the midst of the RNC. Let's take a listen to that.
Any reaction to the Teamsters' decision not to endorse?
No, they were. It's a great honor. They're not going to endorse the Democrats. That's a big thing. And this is the first time in, I guess, 50, 60 years that that's happened. Democrats automatically have the Teamsters. They took a vote, and I guess I was at 60% or more, and that's a great honor.
Yeah, so I think the important thing here is that the president at the time, and still president, of the Teamsters, Sean O'Brien, he refused to endorse Kamala Harris. That kind of gave him leeway now to nudge Trump on the shoulder and say, hey, I really like Chavez. I think she'd be a great pick for labor. Maybe a quid pro quo sort of there is what we're kind of looking at. And I think Democrats could take a breath on this one. She's very pro-labor, only one of 3 Republicans to support the PRO Act, which additional labor rights and union organization rights there.
The interesting thing, Ben, though, is we've seen some Democrats be anti this pick because she's had some past controversial statements on LGBTQ bills and on the infrastructure law, but really of all the cabinet picks we've seen so far, this might be the most friendly to Democrats. I mean, if you look at her record in Congress, there's some studies that show she was the second most bipartisan congresswoman in the last 2 or 4 years. So she's been really good in Congress at kind of straddling both sides of the aisle. So this seems like a pick that both sides would like. She's getting some blowback on both sides, though.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. We're going to jump all over
excited. Go ahead.
There are some Republicans who are actually not happy about this pick because she has been so labor, because she was one of only a few Republicans to support the PRO Act. It's really interesting to see the distinction between having, our Robert F. Kennedy Jr. head up HHS, someone who's fundamentally opposed to HHS. Kash Patel head up FBI, someone who's fundamentally opposed to FBI. Lori Chavez-Deremer is a supportive person for labor, and so it seems like the one potentially choice that could help.
Yeah, it seems like sort of bucking the trend that we saw. And when you talk about her being one of the most bipartisan members of Congress, of course, most of those super bipartisan members of Congress try not to tie themselves to either administration. We saw that happen with a lot of Democrats in swing districts. When Biden was getting ready to drop out, we saw it happen with a lot of Republicans in swing districts if Trump had low approval rating. So interesting to see that happen.
I want to talk about Howard Lutnick, if we can, here at Commerce, because he's been a big booster of those Trump tariffs, those very controversial Trump tariffs. What is the deal with Lutnick?
Yeah, I mean, if you go to someone like Chavez and to Lutnick is the example of someone who's a loyalist to Trump. He really, really has been on the Trump train for the past 4 or 8 years. He was the co-chair of his transition team during this past election cycle, so he really knows Trump, and he's a little controversial on Wall Street. Obviously, he's led Cantor Fitzgerald, which has been a huge financial company, especially over the last 20 years or so, but there's some of his buddies over at Wall Street that are saying, what are you doing? These tariffs are not going to help us at all. It might drive down stocks, so it's definitely a controversial pick.
Absolutely. Well, Ben, Alex, thanks so much for joining us. Coming up on Talking Points, President-elect Donald Trump has recently said that he opposes a federal ban on TikTok, but it's not clear if he'll be able to prevent the ban that has already been approved by President Joe Biden. The latest details on the app's legal fight after the break.
Welcome